She stood in a kitchen that smelled like something between butter and regret. 4 in the morning. Flour on her left cheek where she had rubbed it without thinking. The only light was a single bulb above the stove, the kind of bulb that gives everything beneath it the color of old paper. 2 years later, she would stand in this same kitchen, and her phone would ring, and the screen would read, Walmart Incorporated, Bentonville, Arkansas. But that call was still 2 years away. And before it came, there was the matter of $11.47, which was everything she had on the morning she decided to start. If this story finds you at the right time, subscribe. Not for us, for the next story that might find you when you need it. Josie Wynn had been let go from her job on a Wednesday. She worked at a small insurance office on the east side of Briarfield, Virginia, a town in the Shenandoah Valley that sat between two ridges the way a penny sits between floorboards, easy to overlook, hard to get out. Birdie was 5. Josie had been at the company for 4 years. She had not missed a day in the last 18 months. She had missed 2 before that, both for Birdie's ear infections. And she had brought her laptop to the pediatrician's waiting room and answered emails from a plastic chair while her daughter cried into her shoulder. Her manager's name was Dale. Dale had thinning hair and a coffee mug that said, World's Okayest Boss, which someone had given him as a joke and which he displayed without irony. Dale told her the company was downsizing. He said he was sorry. He did not look at her when he said it. He looked at the wall behind her at a calendar from a vendor that was still showing March, although it was October. And Josie understood that the calendar and the apology had something in common. Both were gestures no one had bothered to make accurate. Josie cleaned out her desk. There was not much to clean. A photograph of her grandmother in a church hat. A tube of hand lotion. A pen she had stolen from a dentist's office 2 years ago without meaning to, and had kept because it wrote well, and because stealing a pen from a dentist felt like the kind of crime that didn't count. She put these things in her purse. She drove home. She sat in the driveway for 11 minutes before going inside. She knew it was 11 minutes because the clock on the dashboard said 2:47 when she parked and 2:58 when she opened the door. And she would remember those numbers for a long time, not because they meant anything, but because the mind holds on to small details when the large ones are too heavy to carry. That was 2 years ago. Birdie was 5 then. She was 7 now. The man she had married was named Kellen. Kellen had brown eyes and a way of leaning against door frames that made him look like he was always about to leave, which as it turned out was not a posture, but a preview. He left when Birdie was 2. He did not leave dramatically. There was no argument that cracked open like a walnut and spilled its bitter center onto the kitchen floor. He simply stopped coming home. First it was late nights, then it was whole nights. Then it was a Thursday when Josie called his phone and a recording told her the number was no longer in service, which is a sentence that sounds administrative but feels like a door locking from the other side. She learned later that he had moved to Roanoke. She did not learn much else. She did not try to. She had named the girl Birdie, not after anyone but because the baby had made a sound in the delivery room that was not quite crying, more like the startled chirp of something small that had just discovered air. The nurse had smiled. Josie had not. She had been looking at her daughter's face and doing math, and she had not stopped doing math since. Rent and electricity and gas and the copay at the pediatrician and the water heater that made a sound like a man clearing his throat every time it turned on. The SNAP benefits had carried them for a while after the job disappeared. The savings account had carried them after that. But savings accounts are not rivers. They do not refill themselves. They are jars, and jars empty. This one had emptied the way money disappears when you are careful with it, and it is still not enough slowly. And then all at once, and then you are sitting at a kitchen table at 4 in the morning with an envelope in front of you. Josie opened the envelope. She took out what was inside and laid it on the table. A $5 bill, 4 ones, a quarter, 2 dimes, 2 pennies. She pressed each bill flat against the table with her palm, running her hand across the creases, smoothing them the way she always did, because there was something in the act of pressing money flat that made it feel like more than it was. It was not more than it was. It was $11.47. The quarter was cold. She held it in her palm for a moment longer than necessary, feeling its weight, which was the weight of a quarter, and nothing more, but which felt in that moment like the weight of a decision she had not yet made. She put everything back in the envelope. She folded it closed. She put it in the drawer beside the stove. The drawer did not close all the way. It had not closed all the way since she moved in. The landlord had said he would fix it. That was 14 months ago. The landlord had not fixed it. Josie had stopped asking. There are things in a house that are broken, and that you stop seeing as broken because they have been broken longer than they have been whole. And after a while, the brokenness becomes the thing itself, and you forget there was ever a version that worked. She stood at the counter and looked at the kitchen. The stove was a Kenmore bought second-hand from a man on Maple Creek Road who had posted it online for $60. The man had helped her load it into the back of her brother's truck and had said it worked fine, which was true in the way that a clock with one hand works fine. It tells you something, just not the whole truth. The oven ran 25 degrees hotter than whatever temperature the dial claimed. Josie had learned this by burning things. A sheet of biscuits that came out the color of roof shingles. A casserole that had formed a crust on top like the skin of a dried lake. She had adjusted. She had learned to subtract. Set it to 350. It means 375. Act accordingly. She had gotten used to it the way you get used to anything that is yours and imperfect and not going anywhere. She opened the cabinet above the stove. On the second shelf, pushed to the back behind a box of rice and a can of black beans, were the things left from the last SNAP purchase. A bag of all-purpose flour 3/4 full, a block of unsalted butter, a bag of dark brown sugar, a half-empty bag of semi-sweet chocolate chips, a small bag of pecans. She stood looking at them. She did not reach for them. She did not close the cabinet. She stood in front of the open shelf and looked at these ingredients the way a person looks at a locked door when they are not sure they have the key. From the stairs behind her, a sound. Small feet on hardwood, the particular rhythm of a child descending stairs one step at a time, both feet on each step, the way 7-year-olds do when they are not yet fully awake. Birdie came into the kitchen in pajamas with a cereal box printed on the front. The shirt was from the Goodwill on Route 11. She had worn it 3 nights in a row because it was soft and she was 7 years old. 7-year-olds do not need more reason than that. She looked at her mother standing in front of the open cabinet. Are we having breakfast? Josie looked at the envelope in the drawer that did not close. She looked at her daughter. She did not answer. Not because she did not want to. Because the answer she was beginning to form in her mind was not about breakfast, and she was not ready to say it out loud yet. The notebook was in a shoebox on the top shelf of the hallway closet. Josie had not touched it in 4 years. She had to stand on her toes to reach it. Her fingers brushing the cardboard until she caught the edge and pulled it down. She carried the box to the kitchen table and opened it. Inside, under a rubber band and a photograph of a woman in a church hat standing beside a folding table covered in aluminum foil pans, was a small notebook with a plastic cover. The plastic was clouded with age and something that might have been oil or might have been butter, or might have been both accumulated over decades of being opened next to a stove. Several pages near the middle were stuck together. The handwriting inside was in pencil, small, slanted, precise. The kind of handwriting that belongs to a person who believed that if something was worth writing down, it was worth writing neatly. This was Mammaw Verna's recipe notebook. Verna Delisle. Wynne had taught Josie to bake in a kitchen not much bigger than this one in a house on Orchard Street that had since been sold to a couple from Northern Virginia who painted the shutters gray and put a Ring doorbell on the front porch. Josie was 9 the first time. Verna had put a step stool in front of the counter and told her to wash her hands. Josie washed them. Verna told her to wash them again. Once is for the dirt, twice is for the habit. Every Sunday for 22 years, Verna had baked cookies and brought them to Greater Mount Olive Baptist Church, where they were sold on a folding table in the fellowship hall after service. The money went to the building fund. The cookies went fast. People came to church early, not for the sermon, for the table. This was known but not discussed openly because discussing it would have required admitting something about priorities that the congregation was not prepared to examine. The recipe that sold out first every single Sunday without exception was the brown butter pecan cookie. Verna had developed it herself over years of small adjustments, a process she described not as experimentation, but as listening. She would say, "The butter tells you when it is done. Brown it until it smells like hazelnuts, not like burning. There is exactly 1 second between the two. Pay attention to that second." Verna died at 81. It was not dramatic. She had eaten Sunday dinner with the family. She had washed her own dishes. She had sat in her chair by the window, and she did not wake up the following morning. The doctor said it was her heart. The family said it was her time. Both of these things were probably true. She left behind very little that could be measured in money. She left behind the notebook. Josie had not opened it in 4 years. She opened it that morning because she had $11.47 and a daughter who had asked about breakfast, and because the only thing she knew how to make that was worth more than its ingredients was the thing her grandmother had taught her. She turned to page 11, brown butter pecan cookies. The pencil was faded, but the measurements were clear. Josie set a block of butter in a small saucepan on the Kenmore and turned the dial to medium, which on this stove meant something closer to medium-high, which she knew and accounted for without thinking about it. The same way her body had learned to account for all the small lies the things in her life told her. The butter melted. Then it foamed. Then the foam subsided and the color began to shift. From yellow to gold. From gold to something deeper, the color of light tea, the color of a Sunday afternoon in late October, when the sun comes through the kitchen window at an angle that makes everything look warmer than it is. And the smell changed. It stopped smelling like butter and started smelling like something else entirely. Warm and round and close to toasted hazelnuts, but not quite, because brown butter is its own thing and does not need a comparison to be understood. It needs only to be smelled once. Then you know it for the rest of your life. She pulled the pan off the heat and poured the butter into a bowl to stop the cooking. 1 second between hazelnut and burning. She had caught the right second. Mammaw Verna would not have said anything about this. She would have simply nodded once and moved on to the next step, because praise was not part of the process. Precision was, results were. The nod was enough. Birdie had come into the kitchen and climbed onto the counter beside the stove. She sat with her legs hanging over the edge, her bare feet swinging slightly, and watched. She did not ask what Josie was doing. She just watched the way children watch when they sense that what is happening in front of them is not ordinary. Josie measured the flour by hand. She did not own a kitchen scale. She used the scoop and level method Verna had used, which is not the method any baking textbook recommends, but which produced results that were consistent because Josie's hands had been trained by Verna's hands, and the measurements lived in her muscles, not in numbers. She mixed the dough. She folded in the pecans and the chocolate chips. She dropped her rounds onto a sheet pan lined with parchment paper she had found in the back of a drawer left over from something she could not remember making. She put the pan in the oven. She set the dial to 350, which meant 375, and set a timer for 11 minutes, which at this temperature meant checking at 9 and pulling at 10 if the edges were golden. At 9 minutes, she opened the oven and rotated the pan because the Kenmore ran hot on the left side. At 10 minutes, she pulled the pan. The kitchen smelled like Mammaw Verna's kitchen had smelled on Saturday nights when she was preparing for Sunday morning. The smell was so specific and so complete that for a moment Josie stood still and let it be what it was without trying to make it into anything else. Some smells are doors. You walk through them and you are somewhere you have not been in years. And the walls are the same color, and the light is the same light. And the person you loved is standing at the counter with flour on her hands, and she's telling you to wash yours again, once for the dirt, twice for the habit. Josie let the cookies cool on the pan for 3 minutes. Then she transferred them to a wire rack. 36 cookies. She picked one up and broke it in half. The outside was firm. The inside was soft and slightly underset, which is what a cookie is supposed to be when it first comes out, because it continues to cook as it cools. And if you bake it until it is done in the oven, it will be overdone on the counter. She handed half to Birdie. Birdie bit into it and stopped chewing. Not because something was wrong. She slowed down. She chewed the way children chew when they are paying attention to what is in their mouth instead of just processing it. She did not say it was good. She took another bite. Josie looked at the 36 cookies on the cooling rack. She turned over the electric bill that was sitting on the counter and picked up a pen. On the back she wrote, "Butter $3.50, flour $2, sugar $1.50, chocolate chips $3, eggs $1. Pecans, she had gotten those from the SNAP purchase and estimated $2. She added it up. $11.50 for 36 cookies. Roughly 32 cents per cookie. She wrote another number below. If she sold them at $1.50 each, 36 times $1.50 is $54, minus $11.50 in cost, $42.50. She looked at the number. She looked at the cookies. She looked at the drawer beside the stove that held $11.47 and would not close all the way. She did not call them beautiful. She called them ready. But ready for what she did not know yet. Dorothea Pritchard lived in the house directly to the left of Josie, separated by a chain-link fence and a strip of grass that neither of them mowed often enough. She was 74 years old. She had taught home economics at the regional high school for 31 years before retiring, and she had been married to a man named Theodore Pritchard for 46 years before he died in his recliner on a Thursday evening 6 years ago. He had been watching a rerun of Wheel of Fortune. He had not finished his coffee. When Dot found him, the cup was still warm. She had poured it out in the sink and washed the cup and put it back in the cabinet, and then she had called the funeral home. She told this story once to Josie on the porch, and she told it without crying, not because she did not feel it, but because Dot was the kind of woman who kept her hands steady when everything else was not. She lived alone now. She kept her house clean and her yard passable and her opinions to herself, unless someone asked for them, and sometimes when they did not. She had known Josie since Josie moved in. She had watched the husband stop appearing without asking about it. She had watched the girl grow from a toddler carried on one hip to a child who walked to the mailbox alone, and she had noted the absence of a second pair of adult shoes on the porch without mentioning it. She had brought Birdie peppermints on 3 occasions and a bag of hand-me-down clothes once, and she had done all of this without any conversation that lasted more than 4 minutes. Because Dot understood that some people needed help, and most of those people did not want to be seen needing it. The morning after the cookies, Josie put 6 of them in a small box that had once held checks from the bank. She carried it next door. She knocked. Dot opened the door in a housecoat and reading glasses and looked at the box the way she looked at most things, with the measured patience of a person who had spent 3 decades evaluating the work of teenagers and had learned that the first glance is never enough. "These are for you. Birdie likes your peppermints." Dot took the box. She opened it on the porch. She picked up a cookie and looked at it, turning it slightly in her fingers. She bit into it. She chewed slowly. She looked at Josie. "Who taught you to brown butter like this?" "My grandmother." Dot nodded. It was not a casual nod. It was the nod of a woman who had spent 31 years teaching young people the difference between cooking that followed instructions and cooking that came from somewhere deeper than instructions. She knew the difference. She could taste it. Your grandmother knew what she was doing. A pause. Dot looked at the cookie again, then at Josie. Do you... Josie did not understand the question at first. Do I what? Know what you are doing with these. Dot held up the cookie. Because these are not for a box from a checkbook. These are for selling. Josie stood on the porch in a t-shirt she had slept in her hair, pulled back her hands, still smelling like brown butter. And she felt something shift beneath her, the way the ground shifts when you step onto ice and you are not sure yet whether it will hold. I don't have a way to sell them. Dot looked at her for a moment over her reading glasses. Then she began to speak. And she spoke the way she had once spoken to classrooms of 16-year-olds clearly, without pausing for questions because the information was the point, and the questions could come after. Virginia allows you to make food in your own kitchen and sell it directly to people. No commercial kitchen required. No health department inspection. You put a label on every package. The label says what is in it, where it was made, and that it was made in a home kitchen, not inspected by the state. You are capped at $25,000 a year in sales. You can sell at farmers markets, at church sales, at your front door if you want. You cannot sell online. You cannot sell through a store. Direct to the customer only. She folded her arms across the housecoat. There is a farmer's market on Route 11 every Saturday. The vendor fee is $25. That is your next problem. She looked at Josie. I suspect you will figure it out. She took the box inside. The door closed. Josie stood on Dot's porch for a moment, holding nothing because Dot was holding everything. Then she went home. She did not have $25. This was technically inaccurate. She had $11.47 minus whatever the cookie ingredients had cost from the SNAP supplies, which meant she still had $11.47 because the SNAP items were already purchased and their cost was already spent. But $11.47 is not $25. And the distance between those two numbers was the kind of distance that felt larger than it was. Because Josie had been measuring distances in dollars for so long that every gap looked like a canyon. She thought about asking at church. She thought about posting on Facebook. She thought about bringing cookies to her old co-workers at the insurance office and asking if anyone wanted to buy some. She thought about each of these things and felt in each case a specific resistance that had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with how she would look. A woman asking for something. A woman with a box of homemade cookies and a story about needing money. She had spent her whole adult life being careful not to look like she needed things, even when she did. Especially when she did. And the thought of standing in front of people she knew with a product in her hands and a price on her lips made something in her chest tighten in a way she could not argue with. Gage came over that Thursday. He was her older brother by 4 years. He worked as a plumber for a company on the other side of the valley, and he came by when something in Josie's house needed fixing, which was often because the house was old and the things inside it were older. That day, it was the kitchen faucet. It had been dripping at a rate of 1 drop every 6 seconds, which Josie knew because she had counted it one night when she could not sleep. Lying in the dark, the house silent except for the sound of water hitting stainless steel at intervals so regular, they could have been measured with a metronome. Drip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Drip. The sound of something being wasted slowly. Gage fixed it in 20 minutes. He sat at the kitchen table afterward, and Josie put a plate of cookies in front of him without explanation. He picked one up. He bit into it. He stopped. He looked at the cookie, then at Josie. These are good. Josie said nothing. Like actually good, not good for homemade good. These are good. They're Mammaw Verna's recipe. I know what they are. I've been eating them since I was 5. He took another bite. How much you selling these for? I'm not selling them. He looked at her the way older brothers look at younger sisters when the younger sister is being unreasonable and both of them know it. It is a look that contains no words but communicates an entire paragraph. The paragraph usually starts with, "Come on," and ends with a period that sounds like a door being held open. He reached into his back pocket and took out his wallet and pulled out a 20 and a 5 and put them on the table between the plate and the sugar bowl. "That is not a gift, that is an investment. I want 10% of nothing, which is still nothing, so you got no excuse." Josie looked at the money on the table. "Take the 25, go to that market on Route 11 and sell these cookies before I eat all of them, and you got nothing left to sell." He took 2 more from the plate, put 1 in each jacket pocket, and left through the back door. The screen door bounced twice behind him the way it always did. Josie stood in the kitchen looking at the $25 on the table. The faucet was not dripping anymore. That was the first thing Gage had fixed that day. The $25 might have been the second. She woke at 3. The house was dark and the street outside was dark, and the only sound was the refrigerator humming its low, steady hum, the sound a house makes when it is keeping things cold for someone who cannot afford to let them go bad. She had prepped the dough the night before. 6 batches mixed and portioned and wrapped in plastic and stacked in the refrigerator on the shelf beside the milk and the half-empty jar of grape jelly. She had done the math. 6 batches was 216 cookies. At $2 each, that was $432 if she sold every one. She would not sell every one. She knew that. But she had made 216 anyway, because the alternative was making fewer, and wondering later if fewer had been the reason. She turned on the oven, set the dial to 350, subtracted 25 in her head, began. The kitchen was small, and the work was repetitive, and she moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had practiced the same motions enough times that her hands no longer consulted her brain. Scoop, level, drop, space, pan in, timer on, pan out, rotate, next pan. She worked in the yellow light of the single bulb above the stove, and by 5:15 she had 216 cookies cooling on every flat surface in the kitchen. The counter, the table, a cutting board balanced on top of 2 overturned mugs. She packed them into Ziploc bags, 3 cookies per bag. On each bag, she stuck a label she had written by hand the night before on adhesive paper Dot had given her. The label read, Mammaw Verna's brown butter pecan cookies. Below that, the ingredients. Below that, in smaller letters, the line Dot had told her was required, made in a home kitchen, not inspected by the Virginia Department of Health. She had written 72 of these labels at the kitchen table while Birdie slept. Her hand had cramped at label number 40. She had flexed her fingers twice, shaken her wrist once, and kept writing because the alternative was going to bed with half-labeled bags and waking up with less time than she already did not have. She loaded the bags into 2 cardboard boxes and carried them to the car. The car was a 2009 Nissan Sentra, with a crack in the windshield that ran diagonally from the lower left to the upper right like a river on a map. The passenger door did not lock from the outside. She went back inside and picked up Birdie, who was asleep on the couch in her clothes, because Josie had dressed her the night before to save time in the morning. Birdie did not wake up. She hung in her mother's arms like something soft and boneless and trusting in the way only sleeping children are trusting. Complete surrender, no negotiation, the full weight of a small body given over to the belief that the arms holding it will not let go. Josie buckled her into the back seat. Birdie's head fell to the side. Josie drove. The Route 11. Farmers Market opened at 6 on Saturdays. When Josie arrived at 5:45, the gravel lot behind the old feed store was already half full with vendors unloading trucks and vans. She could hear the sound of folding tables being snapped open and locked into place, the metallic click of legs straightening. Somewhere, a man was stacking crates of tomatoes in careful rows. A woman poured coffee from a thermos into a paper cup and stood drinking it in the half-dark with her eyes closed. Her face turned toward the ridge where the sun had not yet appeared, but where the sky was beginning to lighten from black to the color of a bruise. The air smelled like morning, damp and still cool with the particular sweetness that Shenandoah Valley air carries before the heat takes over honeysuckle and cut grass, and something mineral underneath the smell of limestone and creek water that never quite leaves the ground. Josie set up her table. She had no tablecloth. She had no display stand. She had no banner, no tent, no business cards, no samples on toothpicks, no chalkboard sign with handwritten prices in a font that was designed to look handwritten but was not. She had 2 cardboard boxes of cookies in Ziploc bags and a piece of cardboard she had cut from a shipping box and written on with a black marker. Mammaw Verna's brown butter pecan cookies. $2 each, 3 for $5. She propped the sign against one of the boxes. She stood behind the table. Birdie was still asleep in the car with the windows cracked. The market opened. People came. They walked along the rows of vendors looking at produce and honey and hot sauce and bread and handmade soap and jars of apple butter with gingham cloth tied over the lids. They walked past Josie's table. Some glanced. Most did not. She smiled at the ones who glanced. They smiled back and kept walking. This is what it looks like when people have already decided something is not for them. They do not stop. They do not slow down. They adjust their path slightly the way a river adjusts around a stone. It does not notice the stone. The stone notices the river. The stone feels every drop. 2 hours passed. She had not sold a single cookie. She stood behind the table with her hands at her sides and her sign propped against the box. And she felt the particular weight of being visible and ignored at the same time, which is a weight that has no name, but which anyone who has ever stood behind a table at a market or sat in a waiting room or raised a hand in a meeting that moved on without calling on them knows intimately. It is the weight of being there and not mattering. She thought about packing up. She calculated the loss, $25 for the vendor fee, $11.50 in ingredients, 12 hours of labor between the baking and the labeling and the not sleeping. She could pack the boxes back in the car and drive home and put the cookies in the freezer and eat them slowly over the next 2 weeks while she figured out something else. She could do that. She did not do that. She stayed behind the table because leaving felt like something she would have to explain to Dot. And she did not want to explain it to Dot. And she did not want to explain it to Gage. And she did not want to explain it to herself. She stayed because leaving is easy when no one is watching. But she was watching. And she was the hardest audience she had. Birdie woke up sometime after 8 and came to the table rubbing her eyes. Josie gave her a cookie and a juice box. Birdie sat on the ground behind the table with a crayon and the back of one of the adhesive label sheets and began drawing. She drew for a while. Then she moved to the table surface itself, kneeling on the ground and reaching up her small body visible just above the table edge like a moon rising, and continued drawing there, her face level with the cardboard sign. A woman in a green jacket stopped. She was not looking at the cookies. She was looking at Birdie. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Birdie looked up. Her face was at the exact height of the table. A crayon in her right hand. A half-drawn cookie on the back of a label. "My mom's cookies." The woman looked at the cookies. She looked at Josie. She looked at the handwritten sign. She looked back at Birdie, who had returned to her drawing, with the absolute focus of a child who has answered a question and considers the conversation finished. "Can I try one?" Josie opened a bag. The woman bit into a cookie and did the thing that Birdie had done and Gage had done and Dot had done before her. She slowed down. She looked at what was in her hand. The particular expression that crosses a person's face when they are eating something they expected to be ordinary, and it is not. It is not surprise exactly. It is closer to recognition. The face of someone who has just remembered something they did not know they had forgotten. She bought 3. She came back 20 minutes later and bought 6 more. She brought a friend. The friend bought 6. The friend told a woman at the honey stand who came over and bought 3. By 10:30, there was a small, steady line at Josie's table that had not been there 2 hours earlier, and that no one, including Josie, fully understood the cause of. Word of mouth is not a strategy. It is a consequence. It is what happens when a product is good enough that the person who buys it cannot help telling the next person they see. You cannot plan for it. You cannot manufacture it. You can only make something worth talking about and then stand there while the talking happens. By noon, she had sold 180 cookies. 36 bags remained. She packed them into the box. She folded the table. She carried Birdie to the car. Birdie had fallen asleep again on the ground behind the table, her head on a crumpled label sheet, the crayon still in her hand. Josie sat in the driver's seat and counted the money. Bills first, then coins. She flattened each bill against her thigh the way she always did, pressing out the creases with the heel of her palm. She put them in order. 20s, then 10s, then 5s, then 1s. She counted twice. She put the money in the envelope she had brought, the same envelope from the drawer beside the stove. $330. Minus roughly $100 in ingredients and the $25 vendor fee. $205 in profit. From cookies. From a recipe in a notebook with a greasy plastic cover. From a Saturday morning and a 7-year-old who had drawn a picture at the right moment for the right stranger. She sat in the car in the gravel lot of the Route 11 farmers market, with the engine off and the windows down, and the money in the envelope on her lap, and her daughter asleep in the back seat. The sun was high now. The valley stretched out on either side, the ridges dark against a sky that was the particular blue of early autumn in Virginia. The blue that comes after the haze burns off and everything looks sharp and close. She pressed the envelope flat with both hands. It was thicker than it had been that morning. She did not cry. She folded the envelope closed and put it in her bag and started the car and drove home past the church on the hill and the Goodwill on Route 11 and the house on Orchard Street where Mammaw Verna had once stood at a counter and told a 9-year-old girl to wash her hands twice. And she pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine and sat for a moment before going inside. She went to the kitchen. She opened the drawer beside the stove and put the envelope inside. It sat on top of the old one, the one with the 1147. 2 envelopes now. The drawer still did not close all the way, but what was inside it had changed. The second Saturday was easier because the fear was smaller. The third Saturday was easier still. By the 4th week, she had regular people who came to the market specifically for her table and who were annoyed when she sold out before they arrived, which she began doing by 11, then by 10:30, then by 10. Week 1, $330. Week 2, $410. Week 3, $380. Because it rained and the market closed early, and the people who did come moved fast under umbrellas and did not stop for cookies. The way they stopped when the sun was out and the morning felt generous. Rain makes people efficient. Efficiency is the enemy of browsing, and browsing is the thing that turns a stranger into a customer. Week 4, $520. She had started bringing more. She had started taking orders for church events and birthday parties. A woman named Charlene asked for 5 dozen for a family reunion in Waynesboro and paid in advance and told Josie she would tell her cousins, which she did. Because the following Tuesday, Josie received 3 phone calls from numbers she did not recognize, all of them from Waynesboro, all of them asking about cookies. She kept the money in the envelope. She kept the envelope in the drawer. She had opened a bank account in October. A checking account at the credit union on Route 11, with a minimum balance of $25 and no monthly fee, but she still put the cash in the envelope first every Saturday and counted it there and pressed each bill flat against the kitchen table before driving to the credit union on Monday morning. The envelope was a step she did not need. She kept it anyway. Some rituals are not about efficiency. They are about the person you were when you started and keeping her close so she can see what she is becoming. On the 5th Saturday, Josie arrived at the market with 3 products instead of 1. She had spent the week experimenting. Snickerdoodles rolled in cinnamon sugar. The edges cracked in the way snickerdoodles are supposed to crack, which she had learned by making 4 batches that did not crack and 1 that did, and then figuring out that the difference was chilling the dough for exactly 40 minutes, not 30, not 60. Lemon shortbread, dense and buttery with a glaze she had mixed from powdered sugar and the juice of 2 lemons she had bought at the dollar store. for a price that felt unreasonable for fruit. She had made them carefully. She had packaged them with the same handwritten labels and the same attention. She had been proud of the variety. 3 products on the table instead of 1. It looked like a business. It looked like growth. The snickerdoodles sold 7 bags by noon. The lemon shortbread sold 4. The brown butter pecan cookies sold out by 9:45. By noon, she was sitting behind a table with 2 products that people looked at and walked past, and 1 empty space where the product they wanted had been. The empty space was the most eloquent thing on the table. It said everything the snickerdoodles and the lemon shortbread did not. She told Dot about it that evening. She was standing on Dot's porch because Dot had not invited her inside, not because Dot was unfriendly, but because Dot's porch was where conversations happened, and Dot's living room was where Dot happened. And the 2 were separate territories with separate rules. I thought people would want options. Dot was sitting in the metal chair she kept beside the door, a glass of sweet tea on the railing. The ice had melted. Dot did not seem to notice or did not care, which with Dot were often the same thing. A restaurant that does 1 dish perfectly will outlive a restaurant that does 20 dishes adequately. That is not my opinion. That is arithmetic. Josie did not bring snickerdoodles or lemon shortbread to the market again. She brought brown butter pecan cookies. More of them, only them. The market had told her what it wanted. She had tried to be everything. The market had said be one thing. Be that thing so well that people drive from Waynesboro for it. She listened. There was also the man. He appeared on the 3rd Saturday. He walked up to the table, pointed at the cookies, held out a $10 bill, and took 2 bags. He did not say good morning. He did not ask what was in them. He did not comment on the weather, or the market, or the handwritten sign. He took his 2 bags and he left. He came back the following Saturday. Same routine. 2 bags, cash. A nod so slight it could have been a muscle twitch. No conversation. And the Saturday after that. And the one after that. Josie did not know his name. She called him the quiet regular in her head. The way you name a stray cat that comes to your porch, not to claim it, but to have something to call it when you think about it later. He was somewhere around 50. He wore button-down shirts with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. The kind of shirts that suggested he had somewhere to be after the market that was not a farm. His hands were clean. His shoes were not work boots. That was all she noticed, because noticing more would have required him to stay long enough to be noticed, and he never did. She did not know yet that he mattered. She would. The email came on a Tuesday. It was from the market manager, a woman named Patrice, who wore a sun visor regardless of the weather, and carried a clipboard, and spoke in the efficient practiced tone of someone who managed 40 vendors, and had learned that conversations without a point were conversations she could not afford. The email said that a complaint had been filed. Another vendor, a woman who sold pralines from a certified commercial kitchen in Staunton, had raised a concern. The concern was that Josie was operating without a commercial food license. The concern was valid in the narrow sense that it was technically accurate and invalid in the broader sense that it was motivated not by public safety, but by the fact that Josie's table was outselling hers. The praline woman had been at the market for 6 years. She had a tent with her name on it. She had a banner. She had a logo designed by someone who charged money to design logos. She had everything except a line of customers at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, because that line was now in front of a woman with a cardboard sign and Ziploc bags. The cottage food law allowed Josie to sell at the market. She knew that. Dot had told her that. But the law had a ceiling. In Virginia, $25,000 per year. Josie had been at the market for 2 months. She was averaging $430 per Saturday, 52 Saturdays per year. Projected annual revenue, $22,360. And that was before the phone orders, the church events. The family reunion in Waynesboro, the woman from the Baptist church in Lexington, who had called last week asking about a standing order. She was going to cross the line. Not if. When? The distance between where she was and where the law said she could not go was shrinking every Saturday, and she could feel it the way you feel a wall getting closer in a room that is slowly getting smaller. She was not there yet. She could see it from where she stood. Josie went to the Briarfield branch of the Shenandoah County Library the following afternoon. She sat at one of the public computers, the third one from the left, the one with the chair that wobbled, and typed Virginia Food Business License into the search bar. She read for 2 hours. She did not take notes at first because she did not think she would need to. Then the information became dense, and she began writing on the back of a receipt from the Dollar General, the only paper she had in her purse. She learned the difference between cottage food and a commercial food license. She learned that a commercial food license required a certified commercial kitchen, a kitchen inspected and approved by the Virginia Department of Health, with stainless steel surfaces, commercial-grade ventilation, hot water at a specific temperature, a 3-compartment sink for washing, rinsing, and sanitizing. She learned that renting time in a commercial kitchen cost between $15 and $25 per hour, depending on the facility. She learned that she would also need liability insurance, which started at around $400 per year. She learned that she would need a food handler certification, which required a 4-hour course and a test. She learned that she would need to register as a business entity, which meant an LLC, which meant a filing fee of $100. She added it up on the receipt. The numbers were not small. They were not impossible either. But they were the kind of numbers that require a person to have already been making money before they can spend money to keep making money. The system was built in a circle. To grow, she needed a license. To get a license, she needed a kitchen. To afford a kitchen, she needed to have already grown. She closed the browser. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the library with the receipt in her hand and the numbers on it that she had written in the space between a charge for paper towels and a charge for grape juice. The specific weight of information that is useful and discouraging at the same time. The feeling of learning that the door you need to walk through is real and is open and has a cover charge you cannot pay. She had closed the browser because the information was heavy. She opened it again because heavy was not the same as impossible. She had learned this. She was learning it still. The two states, heavy and impossible, look alike from a distance, the way two mountains look alike when you are standing in the valley between them. But one of them has a path. You just have to walk closer to see it. She went home and called Dot. She told her about the email and the complaint and the $25,000 cap and the commercial kitchen requirement. She listed the costs on the phone, the way she had listed them on the receipt, each one a stone placed on a scale. Dot listened. Dot was good at listening, which is different from being patient. Patience is waiting for someone to finish. Listening is hearing what they are not saying while they say what they are. Dot heard the numbers. She also heard the silence between them, which was the silence of a woman standing at the edge of something and looking down. Mount Olive Baptist on Church Hill Road. Josie paused. What about it? Their kitchen. It was certified as a commercial kitchen 4 years ago. The pastor's wife had a catering business. She made pound cakes for weddings. She stopped 2 years ago her knees, but the certification is still active. They rent it out, $12 an hour. Josie said nothing for a moment. 12 is not 25. I checked. The line was quiet. Then Dot said, "You have a pen." Josie drove to Mount Olive Baptist the following Thursday. The church sat on a low hill off Church Hill Road, a white clapboard building with a steeple that had been repainted so many times. The layers of paint were thicker than the wood underneath. The parking lot was gravel. The sign out front listed service times and a Bible verse that Josie did not read because she was looking at the building and trying to see through the walls, the kitchen that might be inside it. She went in through the side door. A woman in the office, Mrs. Gladys, who had held the position of church secretary for 19 years and who treated the church's scheduling calendar the way air traffic controllers treat radar screens, told her the pastor was in the fellowship hall. She walked down the hallway past bulletin boards with announcements for fish fry dinners and vacation Bible school, and a poster for a men's breakfast that had happened 3 months ago and that no one had taken down. She found him setting up folding chairs for Thursday evening Bible study. Reverend Ansel Boone, early 60s, large hands, a voice that carried without being raised the voice of a man accustomed to speaking to rooms that were sometimes full and sometimes were not, and who had learned to speak the same way to both. He listened to Josie explain what she needed without interrupting. When she finished, he set down the chair he was holding. The kitchen is available Tuesday and Thursday nights, 6 to 10. Bring your own ingredients, $12 an hour. We ask that you leave it cleaner than you found it. That was all. No speech about entrepreneurship, no encouragement, no parable about mustard seeds or loaves and fishes. A door was available, and he told her where the handle was. What she did with it was her business. Josie walked into the kitchen. It was 4 times the size of her kitchen at home. 2 commercial ovens side by side, their steel faces reflecting the fluorescent light overhead. Stainless steel counters long and unbroken without a single burn mark or juice stain. A 3-compartment sink deep enough to bathe a child in. Overhead ventilation that hummed when she flipped the switch. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, the sound of electricity doing its job without enthusiasm. She touched the counter. It was cold. She put her palm flat against it the way she pressed bills flat on the kitchen table, feeling the temperature of professional equipment. The specific neutrality of surfaces that are designed to be sanitized. Surfaces that do not absorb, do not stain, do not remember. Her counter at home had a burn mark from a pot she had left too long, and a purple crescent from a cup of grape juice Birdie had knocked over on a Tuesday morning 17 months ago. She had scrubbed it with baking soda and bleach, and the stain had faded but not vanished. And she had stopped seeing it the way she stopped seeing the drawer that did not close, not because it was gone, but because it had become part of the landscape of her life, a feature, not a flaw. This counter had no landscape. It was waiting. She turned to the ovens. She opened the first one and looked at the temperature dial. She turned it to 350. She waited. She put her hand near the opening, not inside near, and felt the heat. She pulled her hand back and checked the dial again. 350 meant 350. She stood in front of an oven that did not lie. It told her the temperature, and the temperature was the temperature. She did not need to subtract 25. She did not need to rotate the pan because one side ran hot. She did not need to check at 9 minutes because 11 minutes might mean 12. She had spent 2 years baking in a kitchen where the equipment told her the wrong number, and she had learned to correct for it the way a person learns to walk with a limp and stops noticing the limp until the day the leg is healed. And walking straight feels strange. The straightness feels wrong. The body has memorized the compensation. The muscles have organized themselves around the error, and when the error is removed, the muscles do not know what to do with themselves. She did not know what to do with an oven that told the truth. She would learn. The first week in the church kitchen, she doubled her output. 432 cookies instead of 216. She used both ovens. She worked from 6 to 10 on Tuesday, mixed and portioned dough at home on Wednesday, and baked the second half from 6 to 10 on Thursday. She sold out at the market by 9:30 on Saturday. She came home that night and sat at the kitchen table and counted the money, and the number was larger than any number she had counted before in her life that belonged to her. Numbers that belonged to other people, rent amounts, medical bills. The cost of a car repair she could not afford, those numbers had always been large. Numbers that belonged to her had always been small. This number was not small. She pressed each bill flat. She counted twice. She put the money in the envelope. She put the envelope in the drawer. The drawer did not close all the way. She did not mind. The second week, she decided to push further. 500 cookies. She arrived at the church kitchen on Tuesday at 6 and began. She scaled the recipe up. More butter, more flour, more sugar, more pecans. She used the larger mixing bowls. The church kitchen had metal bowls so wide she could have used them as wash basins. She filled 4 sheet pans instead of 2 and put them all in at once because the ovens were larger. and she assumed that larger ovens meant more capacity, which was true. But she did not yet understand that more capacity did not mean identical conditions. A home oven is a small space. The heat wraps around the pan the way a hand wraps around a cup. Everything is close. Everything is even or close enough to even that the difference does not matter. A commercial oven is a larger space. The heat circulates differently. The edges are hotter than the center. The top rack bakes faster than the bottom. The air moves in patterns that depend on how many pans are inside and where they are placed, and whether the door has been opened recently, and how long ago the oven was calibrated, and a dozen other variables that professional bakers know the way. A carpenter knows wood grain, not from reading about it from years of putting their hands on it and feeling what it does. Josie was not a professional baker. She was a woman with a recipe and an oven that had finally stopped lying to her, and she had assumed that an honest oven was the same as a simple one. This was the error. Honesty is not simplicity. An honest oven tells you the truth, but the truth in a commercial oven is more complicated than the truth in a home oven. The way the truth in a marriage is more complicated than the truth on a first date. More information, not less. More to account for, not fewer. She pulled the first batch at 11 minutes. The cookies on the outside edges of the pan were dark, past golden, past amber. The color of something that had been left too long in a place that was too hot, which is exactly what had happened. The cookies in the center were pale and soft, not underset in the good way, underset in the not finished way. The way a sentence is not finished when it trails off without a period. She pulled the second batch. Same problem. Worse. The outside ring was nearly burnt. The center was raw enough that when she pressed one with her finger, it sank and did not come back. The third batch she had tried to correct by rotating the pans halfway through. It helped on one pan. On the other, the damage was done by minute 6, and no amount of rotating at minute 6 was going to undo what minute 1 through 5 had already accomplished. She stood at the counter at 10:45 at night and sorted the cookies into 3 piles. The first pile was sellable, fully baked, evenly golden, the inside soft in the right way, the way Mammaw Verna's cookies had always been soft. 150 cookies. She put them in bags. The second pile was slightly overbaked on the edges, edible. Not bad. Not up to her standard, which was not a standard she had written down anywhere, but which lived in her hands and in her memory, of the way a cookie was supposed to feel when you broke it in half. The slight resistance, the clean snap of the outside, the gentle pull of the inside. These cookies snapped but did not pull. The inside had gone past soft into firm. 150 cookies. The third pile was underdone in the middle. The kind of cookie that would collapse when a customer picked it up, that would leave a smear of raw dough on the inside of the bag, that would make a person who had paid $2 for a cookie feel that they had been cheated not by the seller, but by the cookie itself, which had promised something on the outside that it did not deliver on the inside. 200 cookies. 350 cookies she could not sell. Josie sat on the floor of the church kitchen. The tile was cold through her jeans. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her with the indifference of machinery that does not know what is happening beneath it. The stainless steel counters reflected the light in a flat, neutral way that offered no comfort and no judgment. She looked at the 3 piles on the counter and did the math. $120 in ingredients, $48 in kitchen rental, 5 hours of labor, 5 hours of standing on concrete, of bending over counters, of lifting sheet pans that weighed more when they were full of failure than they weighed when they were full of possibility. She added these numbers together, and the total did not care that she had woken at 4 in the morning. The total did not care that she had driven across town with her daughter asleep in the back seat. The total did not care about effort or intention, or the number of Saturdays she had stood behind a table and smiled at strangers. The math did not care about effort. The math was just the math. She sat on the floor for a long time, long enough for the ovens to cool, long enough for the kitchen to go quiet in the way commercial kitchens go quiet when no one is cooking, a silence that is larger than the silence in a home kitchen, because the room is larger and the surfaces are harder, and sound has nothing soft to land on. Then she stood up. She cleaned the kitchen the way Reverend Boone had asked, cleaner than she found it. She loaded the 150 sellable cookies into a box. She put the 350 unsellable cookies into 2 garbage bags and carried them to the dumpster behind the church. She did not look at them as she dropped them in. Looking at wasted food is a specific kind of pain when you have known what it feels like to not have enough of it. She drove home. She would sell the 150 on Saturday. She would lose money this week. She would not lose the lesson. She went to the hallway closet and reached for the shoebox. She brought it to the kitchen table and opened the notebook. She turned to page 11, the recipe. The measurements she had memorized years ago that lived in her muscles, that she could have recited the way some people recite prayers from the body, not the mind. But this time she did not look at the recipe itself. She looked at the margins. Mammaw Verna had written in the margins the way some people write in the margins of Bibles. Small notes in pencil squeezed between the lines of her own handwriting. Additions made at different times with different pencils, some sharp, some dull. The graphite varying in darkness the way it does when notes are added over years, one thought at a time whenever the thought arrived. Near the bottom of this page, below the baking instructions in handwriting, that was smaller and more cramped than the rest, as though it had been added later, and in a hurry, were 2 lines. For the church oven, reduce temp 15 degrees and add 2 minutes. Rotate halfway. Bottom rack only. Josie read the lines twice. Then she read them again. Mammaw Verna had baked in a church kitchen, yes. She had stood in front of a commercial oven that was not her own. An oven in a fellowship hall that smelled like Friday fish fries and Sunday morning coffee, and she had figured out how to make her recipe work inside it. She had done this decades ago, before Josie was born, before the house on Orchard Street was sold to the couple from Northern Virginia. Before the step stool and the instruction to wash your hands twice, before any of it, she had written down what she learned. In the margin of the same page Josie had been reading from all along. And Josie had never seen it because she had never needed to see it. The note had been there for 30 years, waiting on a page that Josie had looked at 100 times invisible, until the night it became necessary, the way a star is invisible in daylight, not gone just waiting for the dark. Josie traced the handwriting with her finger. The pencil was faded, but the lines were pressed deep into the paper, the grooves visible even where the graphite had worn away. Verna had pressed hard. She always pressed hard. She was a woman who believed that anything worth writing was worth pressing into the page, as though the page might try to forget. Josie sat at the table for a while. She did not cry. She was not the kind of person who cried at kitchen tables. She was the kind of person who wrote things down. She picked up a pen. Below her grandmother's note in her own handwriting, rounder than Verna's, less slanted, the handwriting of a different generation trained on different paper, she wrote, for Mount Olive commercial oven, 335 degrees, 13 minutes, rotate at 7, top and bottom racks okay if staggered. 2 sets of instructions, 2 generations, the same problem solved decades apart on the same page of the same notebook. Verna's pencil above, Josie's pen below. The page was crowded now. The margins were full. It was better that way. She closed the notebook. She put it back in the shoebox. She did not put the shoebox back on the shelf in the hallway closet. She put it on the counter beside the stove where she could reach it without climbing, without stretching, without asking for help. Within reach, where it should have been all along. The following Tuesday, she went back to the church kitchen. She set the ovens to 335. She put the pans on the bottom rack of the first oven and the middle rack of the second, staggered the way she had written. She set the timer for 13 minutes. At 7 minutes, she opened both ovens and rotated the pans. At 13 minutes, she pulled them. Every cookie was golden. Every edge was even. Every center was soft in the way that meant it would firm as it cooled, the way Verna's had always firmed. Not hard, not crunchy, just set the way. A decision sets after you have made it and stopped second-guessing and let it become what it is. She made 500 cookies that night, all of them sellable, all of them worthy of the name on the label. She sold out at the market by 9:15. She drove home and put the money in the envelope and put the envelope in the drawer. And the drawer did not close, and she stood in the kitchen and felt something she had not felt in a long time, which was the specific sensation of a thing working. Not perfectly, not easily, but working. The way a machine works when all its parts are doing what they are supposed to do. Even the parts that are old, and the parts that are dented, and the parts that have been replaced with something that is not quite the right size but close enough. Weeks passed. The quiet regular kept coming. 2 bags, cash, nod, gone. Josie had begun to anticipate him the way you anticipate weather. Not with excitement or dread, just with the awareness that he would arrive, and he did. And then he was gone, and the market continued. Then on a Saturday in late September, he bought his 2 bags the same way he always did. But this time he did not leave. He stood to the side of the table holding his bags and waited. 2 women were in front of Josie counting change, telling her the cookies were wonderful, asking if she had considered selling online, telling her she should really think about a website. Josie smiled and thanked them, and said she would think about it, which she would not. Because thinking about a website required time she did not have, and money she was not ready to spend, and a version of herself that knew what a website was supposed to look like, and she was not that version yet. The women left. The quiet regular stepped forward. "My name is Leland Cooke." Josie looked at him. She had seen this man every Saturday for 3 months. She had never heard him say more than the word "two," accompanied by a gesture toward the bags. "I own a restaurant on Main Street in the village. It's called Cooke's. It seats 42 people and we're open 5 nights a week." He paused. He was not a man who was comfortable with speeches. She could see him managing the effort of it the way a person manages a heavy object carefully with both hands, aware of the weight. "I've been buying your cookies for 3 months. I serve them as dessert at my restaurant. I don't make dessert. I've never made dessert. I buy yours and I put them on a plate, and my customers keep asking where I get them. They are the only dessert on the menu, and they are the reason some people come back." Another pause, longer this time. "I need 200 a week, every week. Can you do that?" Josie did the math before she answered. The math was automatic now. The way breathing is automatic, the way the subtraction of 25 degrees from the Kenmore's dial was automatic. 200 cookies per week. She was currently making about 450 for the market. Adding 200 meant 650 total. More hours at the church kitchen, more ingredients, more packing, more driving, more mornings that started with a 3 in front of them. What price? $1 a cookie. "I know you sell them for 2 at the market. I'm asking for wholesale. I'll pick them up every Wednesday." The math again. 200 cookies at $1 each. $200 per week. Her cost per cookie was roughly 32 cents. Profit per cookie at wholesale, 68 cents. At retail, it was $1.68, less per unit. But 200 guaranteed per week. Rain or shine. No table. No market fee. No standing for 6 hours hoping people stopped. She made less per cookie and more per week. That was the math of growing. The numbers get smaller and the total gets larger, and you have to learn to be comfortable with that. The way you have to learn to be comfortable with an oven that tells the truth, more information, not less. More to account for, more to hold. "I can do that. Starting next Wednesday." He nodded once. He took a card from his shirt pocket and put it on the table. A plain white business card. The restaurant name. A phone number. Nothing else. He picked up his 2 bags and left the way he always left. Quietly. Without ceremony. A man who said what he needed and then was finished talking. Josie looked at the card on the table. She picked it up and put it in the envelope in her bag, the one that held the money. It sat on top of the bills like a different kind of currency, not cash, proof. The first year ended in December. Josie sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night and added up the numbers in the composition book she had been keeping since the first Saturday at the market. Not the recipe notebook, a different one, a composition book from the Dollar General with a black and white marbled cover, the kind children use in school for penmanship practice. She had written every sale in it, every expense, every Saturday total, every wholesale delivery to Leland, every cost of flour and butter and sugar and pecans and parchment paper and Ziploc bags and labels and market fees and kitchen rental. The handwriting filled 63 pages. Some entries were neat. Some were scrawled in the car between the market and the credit union. One entry, from the week Birdie had a fever, and Josie had baked with her, sleeping on a blanket on the church kitchen floor, was written in handwriting so unsteady it looked like someone else's. The total revenue for the year was $22,400. She looked at the number for a long time. It was sitting on the wrong side of the line, not approaching the $25,000 ceiling, already above the comfortable distance she had planned to keep. She had watched the number rise for the last 2 months. She had thought about turning down orders. She had thought about skipping a Saturday. She had thought about telling Leland she needed a week off. She had not done any of these things. She had kept baking. She had kept selling. She had kept putting money in the envelope and the envelope in the drawer, and now the number was $22,400 and the ceiling was $25,000, and the distance between them was not a canyon anymore. It was a curb. She could step over it without trying. She would step over it by spring if she changed nothing. The ceiling was not a wall, it was a border. On this side, cottage, food, home, kitchen, handwritten labels, direct sales only. On the other side, commercial license certified kitchen liability insurance, LLC filing the right to sell online, the right to sell through a store, the right to grow without a number telling her to stop. Dot came over on New Year's Day with a plate of black-eyed peas and rice. She did this every year. It was not a tradition she explained or invited comment on. She appeared with the plate. She sat at the table. She ate a forkful herself because Dot believed that any food worth bringing to someone else's house was worth eating alongside them. Josie told her the number, $22,400. Dot nodded. She chewed. She set her fork down. Next year you need to decide if this is a hobby or a business, because $25,000 is where the law makes you choose. She did not say it as advice. She said it as fact. The way she said everything. The way a woman who had spent 31 years teaching 16-year-olds the difference between a teaspoon and a tablespoon said things clearly once without softening. Josie sat across from her and looked at the black-eyed peas on the plate and thought about the word choose. It is a small word, 4 letters. It fits easily in the mouth. But the thing it describes is not small. Choosing is the act of closing every door except one and walking through the one that remains and not looking back to see if the other doors are still there. They are not. That is what choosing means. She chose. She went to the library on the second Monday of January. She typed Virginia LLC registration into the search bar. She read the form. She read it again. She filled it out. Filing fee $100. She paid it with the debit card attached to the checking account she had opened with the first $330 from the market. The following week, she took a food handler certification course online. $15, 4 hours. She sat at the kitchen table with the laptop Dot had lent her a Dell. So old the battery lasted 40 minutes, and the fan sounded like a small animal running on a wheel, and answered questions about temperature, danger zones, and cross-contamination, and proper hand washing, which she could have answered without the course, because Mammaw Verna had taught her most of it before she was 12, but which the state of Virginia required her to answer on a screen and submit with a fee before it would believe she knew what she already knew. She passed. She printed the certificate at the library. She called the Virginia Department of Health. The woman on the phone had a voice like a filing cabinet, organized, efficient, containing everything you needed if you knew where to look. She explained the requirements. Josie wrote each one on the back of an envelope. Commercial kitchen had it. Inspection scheduled. Liability insurance $480 per year. She called 3 companies. She chose the one that was $480 because it was the lowest and because $480 was a number she could hold without her hands shaking. She went back to Mount Olive Baptist and spoke to Reverend Boone. She asked for a formal rental agreement, a signed document stating that the kitchen was a certified commercial facility and that she was an authorized user. He wrote it by hand on church letterhead. His handwriting was large and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who signed things rarely and meant it when he did. She thanked him. She put the paper in a folder she had bought at the Dollar General for 79 cents. She submitted the application. She waited. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail. She opened it on the porch. Not inside, not in the kitchen. On the porch where the air could reach her, where the light was natural, where if the answer was no, she could sit in the cold and let the cold do what the kitchen could not, which was hold the feeling without absorbing it. It was not no. She held the paper, her name, the name of the business she had registered, Mammaw Verna's LLC, the words commercial food license. A date, a signature from someone she had never met, someone sitting in an office in Richmond who had looked at her paperwork and decided that Josie Wynne was allowed to sell cookies without a ceiling. Gage came by that afternoon. He saw the paper on the table. He picked it up and read it the way he read most things, quickly, with his lips slightly apart, the way people read when they learn to read by reading out loud and never fully stopped. You saved $3,000 in a year selling cookies. You really about to spend $750 of it on paper. Paper is the difference between a woman selling cookies and the business selling cookies. He looked at her. He put the paper down. He picked up a cookie from the plate on the counter and ate it in 2 bites. All right then. Josie did not frame the license. She did not hang it on the wall. She folded it and put it in the drawer beside the stove. The same drawer that held the envelope. The same drawer that had held $11.47 on the morning this began. The drawer still did not close all the way, but what was inside it had changed again. By April of the 2nd year, Josie was baking at the church kitchen 3 nights a week instead of 2. She was selling at 2 farmers markets, Route 11 on Saturdays, and a smaller one in Woodstock on Sundays, that had fewer vendors and fewer customers, but no praline woman with a banner and a grudge. She was filling Leland's weekly order of 200 cookies every Wednesday. She had started taking orders through a Facebook page that Birdie had helped her set up, which she was now legally allowed to do because the commercial license removed the direct sale-only restriction of the cottage food law. Revenue in April was $4,100 in a single month. She stared at the number in the composition book and read it twice because numbers that large still felt like they belonged to someone else. Numbers that belonged to Josie Wynne were supposed to be small. They were supposed to fit in an envelope. They were supposed to require pressing flat to feel like enough. This number did not fit in an envelope. This number was the kind of number that required a checking account and a spreadsheet and a version of herself that was still catching up to the life she was building. But the number carried weight on the other side too. She was baking 650 cookies a week. She was at the church kitchen from 6 to 10 on Tuesday, Thursday, and now Saturday mornings before the market. She was up at 3:30 on baking days and 4 on market days. She was mixing dough and portioning dough and baking dough and cooling cookies and packing cookies and labeling bags and loading boxes and driving to markets and standing behind tables and smiling at strangers and driving to Leland's restaurant and carrying boxes through the back door and driving home and collapsing into a chair and looking at Birdie, who was 9 now, who had learned to seal Ziploc bags and apply labels with a precision that Josie suspected she had inherited from Verna, who had always believed that the way a thing was presented mattered as much as the thing itself. After school, Birdie would sit at the kitchen table and work through a stack of bags while Josie prepped dough for the next bake. They did this in a rhythm that did not require conversation, the sound of the Ziploc seal, the peel of the adhesive, backing the press of the label onto the plastic, over and over. The sound of a business that lived in a kitchen and was run by a woman and a girl who had learned to work side by side the way people learn to breathe beside each other, in a small room automatically without discussion, each adjusting to the other's pace. One evening, while Birdie was labeling and Josie was measuring flour, Birdie said something without looking up. "Mom, why don't you just make less so you don't have to work so much?" Josie stopped measuring. She held the cup of flour over the bowl. She did not put it down. She stood there with the cup in her hand and looked at her daughter, who was 9 years old, and who had asked the question that Josie had been asking herself in the dark at 3:30 in the morning and had not been able to answer. She put the cup down. "That's a good question." Birdie waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned it young, the way children of single mothers learn many things young, not because they are taught, but because the house is small and the silence is large, and the things that happen inside both are impossible not to absorb. "I don't know the answer yet." That was true. She did not know whether what she was building was something she wanted to keep growing or something. She was growing because stopping felt like going backward. She knew she was tired. She knew that tiredness had a texture now that was different from the tiredness of 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the tiredness was empty. It tasted like nothing. It felt like nothing. It was the tiredness of a woman lying in the dark, counting the drips from a faucet, because counting was the only thing she had to do, and the dripping was the only sound the house offered. Now the tiredness was full of purpose and flour dust and the smell of brown butter at 4 in the morning, and the sound of her daughter counting labels at the kitchen table. Full of a composition book with 63 pages of numbers that got larger every month. Full of a drawer beside the stove that held a license with her name on it. But full is still heavy. Full might be heavier. She also knew this, that what she was building was the first thing in her life that had her name on it. Not a job title. Not an employee badge with a photograph that did not look like her, and a name spelled correctly only by accident. Her name. On a license. On a label. On a sign at the market. She had built it from $11.47 and a recipe and a kitchen that lied about its own temperature. She was not ready to make it smaller. She was not sure she was able to make it bigger. She was standing in the exact middle of those two things, and the middle is not a place where answers live. It is a place where decisions wait. The call came on a Thursday at 8:14 in the evening. Josie was in the church kitchen rolling dough for the Saturday batch. Her hands were covered in flour. The radio on the counter was playing something she was not listening to. Her phone was on the stainless steel counter beside the 3-compartment sink face up. And when it lit up, the caller ID showed a number she did not recognize. Area code 479, Arkansas. She almost did not answer. She had been getting calls from numbers she did not recognize for weeks. Extended car warranties, solar panel installations, student loan forgiveness for loans she had never taken. She had stopped answering unfamiliar numbers the way most people stop by letting them go to voicemail and deleting the voicemail without listening. But something made her pick up. She could not explain what. Later, she would think about this moment and still not be able to explain it. A muscle memory, an instinct. The same instinct that had told her to open the shoebox on the morning she had $11.47. The instinct that does not come from logic, but from the part of you that knows things before you do. She wiped her right hand on her apron and picked up the phone. "Hello." A man's voice. Professional but not stiff. The voice of a person who made phone calls for a living and had learned to sound human while doing it. His name was Derek Whitmore. He was a regional buyer for Walmart based in Bentonville, Arkansas. He was calling about her cookies. Josie stood in the church kitchen with the phone against her ear and flour on her left hand, and the dough going warm on the counter, and she did not move. He explained, Walmart runs a program called Open Call. Once a year, they invite small manufacturers and producers from across the country to come to Bentonville and pitch their products directly to buyers. The goal is to find products made in America by small businesses that have something the national brands do not. A store manager at the Walmart in the Valley had bought a bag of cookies at the Route 11 farmers market. He had eaten one in his car in the parking lot. He had brought the rest to his regional meeting. Someone at that meeting had sent a bag to Bentonville. Derek had tried one. I'd like to invite you to this year's open call. It's in 6 weeks. You would come to Bentonville. You'd have 15 minutes to present your product. If we move forward, we'd start with a regional placement. He said this calmly, the way a man says something he says often to many people. This was not a special moment for him. This was a Tuesday in his week. Then he listed what she would need to bring. Product samples in retail-ready packaging, a UPC barcode, proof of liability insurance, food safety certification, documentation of her production facility, evidence that she could meet volume requirements, which for a regional placement meant several thousand units per week. Each item landed on her with individual weight. Retail-ready packaging. She had Ziploc bags with adhesive labels handwritten at a kitchen table. A UPC barcode. She did not know what that cost or how to get one. Several thousand units per week. She was making 650. He asked if she had any questions. She said no, because the questions she had were not questions he could answer. They were questions for the kitchen table at midnight. They were questions for the notebook. They were questions for the drawer that did not close. He asked for her email. She gave it to him. He said he looked forward to meeting her. He said goodbye. Thank you, I'll be there. She hung up. She put the phone down on the counter. She stood in the church kitchen under the fluorescent lights with the dough going soft and the ovens at 335 and the faint buzz of the ventilation overhead, and she did not move for a long time. She looked down at her hands. Flour in the lines of her palms. Dough under 2 fingernails. The specific evidence of a Thursday night spent doing what she had been doing every Thursday night for months, making cookies in a church kitchen by herself. She sat down on the floor. The tile was cold through her jeans. She had sat on this floor once before. That time it was because she had failed. 350 ruined cookies and the math that did not care about effort. This time she sat because her legs had made a decision about what they were willing to hold. And the decision was that they were not willing to hold this. Not the weight of bad news, the weight of good news that was too large to stand under. She sat there for a while. Then she stood up and finished the batch. The 6 weeks that followed were the most concentrated weeks of Josie's life. She made a list on the back of a church bulletin the night of the call. Packaging, barcode, production, 3 words. Each one was a problem she had not solved yet, and each problem contained smaller problems inside it, the way a drawer contains envelopes, and the envelopes contain money, and the money contains decisions. She started with packaging. She could not bring Ziploc bags with handwritten labels to Bentonville. She needed a printed bag with a logo and a nutrition panel, and an ingredient list and a barcode, and the specific appearance of something that belonged on a shelf, beside things made by companies with departments devoted to packaging. She found a freelance designer online, a woman in Richmond who charged $150 for a package design. Josie sent her a photograph of the cookies and the words she wanted on the bag: Mammaw Verna's brown butter pecan cookies. Below that, a Briarfield kitchen table recipe since 1979. The designer sent back a proof 4 days later. Clean, warm, the color of brown butter. It did not look like a Ziploc bag. Josie approved it. The barcode cost $250 through GS1. She paid it and received a number, a string of digits and lines that meant her product existed in the system that stores use to track inventory. It was not a name. It was not a story. It was a number. But it was the number that made the difference between something you sold at a table and something a scanner could read. The production was the hardest. She needed a facility that could produce thousands of cookies per week, using her recipe following FDA manufacturing standards. She called 3 co-packing facilities in Virginia. The first required a minimum order of 10,000 units. The second had a setup fee of $5,000. The third did not return her call, which is its own kind of answer. She found the fourth through Leland. He knew a man who knew a woman who ran a small baking facility in Culpeper, an hour northeast. The facility was modest. 2 production lines, a staff of 11. They agreed to do a trial batch, 300 cookies using Josie's recipe baked in their ovens, packaged in the new bags. Josie drove to Culpeper with the recipe notebook in her lap. This was the part she had not been able to settle. The recipe was in the notebook. The notebook was Mammaw Verna's. The handwriting was pencil pressed hard into paper by a woman who believed that anything worth writing was worth pressing deep. Giving the recipe to a factory meant someone else's hands would make the cookies. Hands that had not been trained by Verna's hands. Hands that did not know the difference between the smell of hazelnuts and the smell of burning. Hands that had never stood on a step stool at 9 years old and been told to wash twice. She sat in her car in the parking lot of the co-packing facility for 10 minutes before going inside. That evening, she told Dot about it. She was sitting on Dot's porch steps. Dot was in the metal chair. I feel like I'm giving something away. Dot looked at the yard. The grass needed mowing. It always needed mowing. Your grandmother gave you the recipe. She didn't tell you to guard it. She told you to use it. She told me to use it, not give it to a factory in Culpeper. She told you to feed people. She did not specify how many. Josie sat with that. The sentence landed the way Dot's sentences always landed, without softness, without cushion, directly on the place where the bruise already was. She went inside and took the notebook to the facility the next morning and stood beside the production manager and walked through every step, every temperature, every timing. The browning of the butter, not until it smells like butter, until it smells like something else. The rotation at 7 minutes, the pull at 13. She watched the first batch come out. She broke a cookie in half. The outside was firm, the inside was soft. The smell was right. It was not identical to hers. It was not identical the way a photograph of a person is not identical to the person. Something is always lost in translation. The warmth of the hand, the angle of the wrist, the pressure of fingers that have been doing this since they were small enough to need a step stool. But it was close. Close enough to be worthy of the name on the bag. Close enough that Verna, standing beside her in whatever kitchen the dead stand in, would have nodded once and moved on to the next step. Josie drove to Bentonville on a Sunday, 7 hours in the Sentra with the cracked windshield and the passenger door that did not lock. Birdie stayed with Dot. The drive was long and flat once she crossed into the Midwest, and she spent most of it not listening to the radio and not rehearsing what she would say, because she had already decided what she would say, and rehearsing would only give her the chance to talk herself out of saying it. She checked into a hotel that was not expensive and not comfortable. She put the box of sample cookies on the desk and the folder of documents beside it. Retail-ready packaging, UPC barcode, liability insurance certificate, food handler certification, commercial food license, co-packing agreement, production capacity projections she had written on the back of a church bulletin and then retyped at the library. She had everything they had asked for. She had everything except the certainty that she belonged in the room. The building was large. She knew it would be large. She had looked it up on the library computer and seen photographs. But large in a photograph is not large when you are standing in front of it, holding a box of cookies in both hands with flour still under one fingernail because you had baked a test batch Sunday morning before leaving and had not scrubbed hard enough. There were hundreds of people in the hallways, other vendors, other small businesses, people with rolling displays and branded tablecloths and printed banners. A man carried a case of hot sauce. A woman rolled a suitcase filled with handmade soap. Everyone was moving with the specific energy of people who had something to prove and 15 minutes to prove it. Josie wore a blazer she had borrowed from Dot. It was slightly too wide in the shoulders, the way borrowed clothes are always slightly wrong in the places that matter most. She had not owned a blazer. She had not needed one. She held the box against her chest and walked to the room number she had been given in the email. Small room, a table. 2 chairs on one side, one on the other. Derek Whitmore was already seated. He was younger than his voice. He had a notepad and a pen and a bottle of water, and the posture of a person who had been doing this all day and had 7 more after her. Tell me about your product. She did not have slides. She did not have a presentation board. She did not have a laptop or a projector or a pitch deck or any of the things that people in rooms like this are supposed to have when they are asking a corporation to believe in them. She had the box. She had the folder. She had the story. She told him about Mammaw Verna, about the kitchen on a Saturday night before church, about the step stool and the instruction to wash your hands twice, once for the dirt, twice for the habit, about the notebook with the greasy plastic cover and the pencil that was faded but pressed deep, about the morning she opened it because she had $11.47 and a daughter who had asked about breakfast, about the Kenmore that ran 25 degrees hot, about the first Saturday at the market when nobody stopped and then a 7-year-old drew a picture and everything changed. She told him about the floor she had sat on, twice, once for failure, once for this phone call. Then she opened the box. This is what $11.47 became. Derek took a cookie. He bit into it. He chewed the way everyone chewed when they ate one of these cookies for the first time slowly, with the particular attention of a person who expected one thing and received another. He set the cookie down and wrote something on his notepad. Then he asked questions. Shelf life. 8 weeks in seal packaging. Unit cost at scale. $1.12 at 5,000 units per week. Suggested retail price. $3.99 for a 6-pack. Current production capacity. 5,000 per week through the Culpeper facility. Scalable to 12,000 within 60 days. He wrote each answer down. He did not react. He did not smile or nod or indicate whether the numbers were good or bad or somewhere between. He was a man doing math, and math does not make faces. When she finished, he looked at his notes. Then he looked up. We're going to start with 50 stores in Virginia. If it performs, we expand to the region. He said this the way he said everything, calmly, without drama. In a room with a table and 2 bottles of water and a box of cookies made from a recipe that a woman had written in a notebook 45 years ago because she believed it was worth keeping. Thank you. Josie stood. She picked up the box. She walked out of the room and down the long hallway past the other vendors who were still waiting, and she pushed through the glass doors and stood in the parking lot of the Walmart home office in Bentonville, Arkansas, in Dot's blazer that did not fit. And she took out her phone and called Dot. Dot answered on the second ring. She always did. 50 stores. A silence on the line. Not long, just enough. The silence of a woman who had spent 31 years teaching and who knew that some results do not require commentary. They require a moment. And then the next step. Well, I suppose you'd better get baking. Josie picked up Birdie from Dot's house the following evening. Birdie was on the porch drawing when the car pulled up. She came down the steps and got in and buckled her seatbelt and looked at her mother with the face she made when she was reading a room which she had learned to do early and well. Did they like the cookies? They're going to put them in 50 stores. Birdie's face did the thing it always did when she was processing a number. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a small tilt of the head. the calculation happening somewhere behind her forehead where the math lived. Is that a lot? It's more than our kitchen. Birdie nodded. She accepted this the way she accepted most things, with the quiet completeness of a child who has learned that her mother's answers are usually the right size for the question. They drove home. 3 months later, on a Saturday, Josie drove to the Walmart on Valley Pike. She parked in the lot and got out and stood for a moment in the morning air, which smelled like October, in the Shenandoah wood smoke and apples, and the particular coolness that settles into the valley when the mountains block the late afternoon sun and the temperature drops before the clock says it should. Birdie was with her. Dot was with her. Dot had driven herself, which was the first time she had driven farther than the Piggly Wiggly in 2 years. She had backed out of her driveway with the caution of a woman who respected the weight of a vehicle and the limits of her own reflexes, and who had decided that both were sufficient for this particular trip. She had said she was not going to miss this. She had said it once without softening. They walked through the entrance, past the registers, past produce where a man was stacking apples in a pyramid that would not survive the morning, past the bread aisle where the air changed from cool to warm and smelled like yeast and plastic. They turned into aisle 9, shelf 4. There, between a national brand that Josie had seen on television her entire life and a store brand she had never noticed, was a small package. The design was clean and warm, the color of brown butter. The logo read, Mammaw Verna's. Below the logo in smaller type, a line that Josie had asked the designer to include because it was the truest thing she knew about where this had come from. A Briarfield kitchen table recipe since 1979. Verna Delisle. Wynne had never stood in a Walmart. She had never seen the inside of a facility in Culpeper. She had never met a regional buyer from Bentonville, or filled out a form for a UPC barcode or signed a co-packing agreement. She had baked cookies in a kitchen and brought them to a church and put them on a folding table every Sunday for 22 years because people were hungry and she knew how to make something that fed them. She had written the recipe in pencil, pressing hard, in a notebook with a plastic cover that clouded with butter over decades. She had given the notebook to her granddaughter. She had not said, guard this. She had not said, protect this. She had said on the first page in handwriting that was small and slanted and precise, for my granddaughter. So she always has something to start with. Something to start with, not something to finish. Not something to keep in a shoebox on a high shelf in a hallway closet. Something to start with. The beginning of a thing, not the end of one. A recipe is a starting point. What you build from it is yours. Josie took the notebook out of her bag. She had brought it. She opened it to the first page and read Verna's line, which she had read before many times, but which she read differently now, standing in aisle 9 of a Walmart, with her daughter beside her and her neighbor beside her, and a package on a shelf with a name on it that had started in a kitchen and had not stopped. She picked up a pen. Below her grandmother's words in her own handwriting, she wrote 2 words, for Birdie. She closed the notebook. 3 generations of handwriting inside it now. Verna's pencil on page 1. Verna's pencil in the margins of page 11. Josie's pen below Verna's notes with the oven temperatures for the church kitchen. And now Josie's pen below Verna's dedication, passing it forward the way Verna had passed it to her. Not with ceremony, not with a speech, but with a pen and 2 words. And the quiet belief that what you give your children does not have to be large. It has to be real. Birdie reached up and touched the package on the shelf. Her fingers rested on the plastic for a moment. She did not pick it up. She just touched it the way you touch something, to make sure it is there. To make sure it is not a thing you imagined, to feel the realness of it against your fingertips. That's our name. That's your great-grandmother's name. Dot stood beside Josie. She adjusted her glasses. She read the label. She read the line about 1979. She said nothing for a moment. Then she put her hand on Josie's arm. Briefly, lightly. The way people touch you when what they are feeling is too large for language and a hand is what is available. She held it there for 2 seconds. Then she let go. Outside the Walmart on Valley Pike, the parking lot was full of people going about their Saturday, the way people do getting what they needed. Loading bags into trunks, returning carts, checking phones, living the ordinary morning of an ordinary day. Inside on shelf 4 of aisle 9, between the national brands and the private labels, was a small package with a name on it that had started in a kitchen. Josie drove home. She parked in the driveway and went inside. She went to the counter where the shoebox sat beside the stove, where it had lived since the night she found Verna's church oven note. She put the notebook back in the box. She opened the drawer beside the stove. The envelope was still there. It was thick now, not with cash. The cash went to the credit union on Mondays. But with the things a life accumulates when it is turning into something. Receipts, a copy of the LLC filing, the food handler's certificate, the commercial license, the liability insurance card, Leland Cooke's business card, white plain, a name and a number. And beneath all of it, folded and soft from handling the original envelope. The one that had held $11.47 on a morning 2 years ago when a woman stood in a kitchen and did not know what to do next, and did the next thing anyway. The drawer still did not close all the way. Josie did not fix it. She had never fixed it. She was not going to fix it now. Some broken things become the truest things in a house. They are the things that were there at the beginning. They are the things that held what mattered when nothing else would. She turned on the Kenmore. She set the dial to 350, which meant 375, which she knew and corrected for without thinking, the way her hands knew the scoop and level of flour, the way her nose knew the 1 second between hazelnut and burning. She took butter from the refrigerator and put it in a saucepan and browned it the way Verna had taught her. She made a small batch, 36 cookies, not for the market, not for Leland, not for Walmart, for Birdie and Dot and Gage and the kitchen table. She pulled them out of the oven that lied and set them on the counter to cool. The kitchen smelled the way it always smelled when she baked, like brown butter and pecans, and the specific warmth of something being made by hand in a room that had seen a lot of mornings. Early mornings, dark mornings, mornings when the only light was a single bulb above the stove, and the only sound was a woman working, and the house keeping things cold for her. Birdie came down the stairs. She sat on the counter the way she had sat on the counter 2 years ago, her legs hanging over the edge, her bare feet swinging. She was taller now. Her feet almost reached the cabinet handles. She picked up a cookie and bit into it and chewed slowly, the way she had chewed the very first one, paying attention to what was in her mouth instead of just swallowing. She did not say it was good. She did not need to. The evening light came through the kitchen window at an angle that made the flour dust visible in the air. Tiny particles suspended and drifting, catching the last of the sun, the way small things catch light when you are still enough to notice them. The valley outside was going gold. The ridges were dark against a sky that was shifting from blue to amber, the way the sky shifts in October in the Shenandoah, slowly without hurrying. The way everything in this valley happens at the pace of seasons, not seconds. Josie did not start with a dream. She started with $11.47 and a daughter who asked about breakfast. The dream came later, after the work, after the market and the church kitchen and the floor she sat on twice, and the oven that lied and the one that did not. After the quiet regular and the email from the market manager and the envelope that went from thin to thick inside a drawer that never closed. Some people begin with a plan, with capital and projections and a board of directors. Others begin at a kitchen table at 4 in the morning with a recipe that someone they loved wrote down because she believed it was worth keeping. Both kinds are real. Both kinds cost something. The difference is only where the money starts. Thank you for listening. Before you go, if you had $11.47 and the recipe from someone you loved, would you have started? Tell us in the comments.